the cloud. Okay, I think we're good. So I guess I'll start it, Richard. Is that okay?
Did you say you all started? Sorry, I didn't hear Michelle. So
Sure. Should I go ahead and welcome to our Unlearning? You typically do it, so I don't
you
know.
can do it. That's good. That's good.
Okay. So yeah, so welcome everybody to our Unlearning Hour. This is a forum for reflecting on some of the experiences that we have related to the Kachawidakuna Indigenous Arts and Humanities Project under the Global Arts and Humanities Discovery theme. And I'll say a little bit more about the mission of that group in just a second, or the vision of that group. But it's also a space for rehearsing, unlearning. So along, the idea of decolonial methods and practices that derive from some of the curricular content, that deals with Indigenous perspectives, but also with Indigenous and other artists, global artists, visits and residencies. So we draw that idea of rehearsing practices from really an amazing experience that we had with the Pachaisana Institute, which is emphatic about rehearsing change, rather than just talking about change or envisioning change, the need to actually rehearse the processes behind it so that when it does happen, um, you know, people have some sense of how to go about it, I guess, no? And then also Pachaisana emphasizes this sort of multisensory approach to anything like beyond intellectual, how can we embody certain practices, how can we listen intently, sort of decentering some of our emphases on sight. So this semester during our Unlearning Hour, we have had a seed takeover in collaboration with Otterbein University and the Frank Museum, centered around Cadine Navarro's work, It Sounds Like Love, which has to do with um, uh, representing and listening intently, to seeds. And I'll let Kadeen say more eloquently about her work. Um, and typically these conversations have revolved around those discussions. But I wanted to take a minute during this session to just update folks about the Kachawidekuna project. Kachawidekuna means messages with beauty. Um, and talk about like some of the upcoming events next semester, ongoing events this semester, just to sort of frame and contextualize the significance of Kadeen's work, in this sort of broader vision. So maybe, I don't know, Kadeen, maybe do you want to say a little bit about your project for people that are attending via the recording, and then also to sort of review, for people who have participated in your classes or in other versions of the Our Unlearning Hour.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes. Okay. So yeah, the sort of ongoing immersive installation exhibition at the Frank Museum, It Sounds Like Love, is a chance to experience the shapes and patterns produced by the sound vibration of 9 Ohio prairie seeds. And visitors are invited to come into a space which was a former church, now museum, and the entire artwork is the ground of the space. So you're invited to come in, take off your shoes, and have an experience in the space. And over the course since the opening of this show on I think it was this 22nd of August or something like this, we've had such a diverse group of people coming in to the space, from young children, students, jubilados, scientists, artists, earth activists, energy, people working in that industry, and just so many diverse voices. And the show continues to stay open and will be extended. The period of opening will be extended because it seems to have some kind of there is this kind of, it's a space for some kind of shift that's happening, and it seems to be thanks to the embodied experience of it, just the act of taking off our shoes and spending a moment to quiet down a little, or and to listen and to connect with something that we didn't necessarily think we could connect to. And a lot of the times I think we can pass through our world thinking that, feeling alone in the world, and then not realizing that there's actually this all so much animation around us. And so it seems to be bringing this up in the visitor. And also even people who haven't visited and who are reading about it are asking the same types of questions. So this is a really interesting kind of, this is really interesting to think about. Yeah. But so we're inviting as many more visitors as possible to just have this experience and hear your voices.
No, thank you, Kadeen. And I think that might be a good opportunity for it. It kind of segues into introductions, we just typically go around and introduce ourselves. But I think that Kadeen, as you're describing your work, it really resonates with this broader vision of Kachawidaikuna, Messages with Beauty, which is focused on an appreciation of art, and in our case, indigenous art, as meaning-making practice, as communication, as something that has agency in the world, to act upon the world, and to really appreciate that. And by way of that, to think about radical diversity, right? Kind of emphatic plurality, thinking about how that connects to decolonial methodologies and practices, right? More broadly. And I know that hopefully, I know that the students were really impressed with your visit. So let me just segue by way of that, just sort of just that brief sort of emphasis of Kachawidaikuna and what that project represents, with an emphasis on not just talking about art and indigenous peoples, right, but actually bringing in indigenous residencies, connecting to global artists like yourself, Kadeen, and those broader discussions, thinking about knowledge equity and other concepts of representation, that sort of come into the mix. So let me stop talking and pass it over to, maybe we can go to Emily, and we start kind of a round of introductions, which before we get too far into this.
Sure. I'm Emily. I'm a fourth year undergrad at Ohio State. I'm a Spanish minor, and I'm taking Latin soundscapes with Professor Wibbelsman this semester. And it's just been a really, I'd say, eye-opening experience taking this class. I feel that oftentimes people my age and people growing up in our education system don't really understand Indigenous culture and don't have the opportunity to hear about the diversity that brings. So it's been a very, I'd say, I think, yeah, eye-opening experience, just understanding what sound means across different cultures and across different peoples, and understanding that sound does have agency. I think that we've become so accustomed to just hearing music and not understanding the deepness of it, or understanding that it can mean more than what we hear on the surface. So yeah, I've really enjoyed the class so far and had a great discussion yesterday with having Kadeen in our class. So I wanted to join today just to continue the discussion.
Claire, do you want to keep going? And then you can pass it to whoever you think should go next.
I'm Claire. I'm a third year, and I am also a Spanish minor. And I have Professor Wibbelsman for, what is our class called? Indigenous People and Cultures in Latin America. And it's been an amazing experience so far. We've been sort of going through a process of decolonizing our classroom. So we kind of started out the year in just a sort of regular format, sitting all of our desks in a row. And we slowly moved to sort of sitting in a circle and having a more conversational, open forum of a classroom. And we've recently moved classrooms, and The whole class has been just great. We've been talking about sort of different philosophies of thought, I would say is a way to describe it, of Indigenous people, and how we can sort of integrate that into our own perspectives. Yeah, it's been really awesome.
Okay. And later on, Claire, I'll invite you to talk a little bit about I mean, Kadeen, your visit made a real impact on that class. And we've been talking about it and actually implementing some things like taking our shoes off and walking on, the space, to just be sort of mindful of entering that new our we abandoned our previous classroom, and we moved to the collection room. So yeah, but yeah, so maybe we'll talk about that later with Claire as well. Oh, sorry, Peter.
So my name is Peter Freeman, and I, as you already know, I'm a classroom teacher in Ontario. But the reason that have joined the Unlearning Hour, and I usually don't go into this kind of detail, but so I'm the father to two Indigenous children from Latin America, and I've never had the opportunity to do here in Canada any deep dive or even be introduced to Indigenous cultures and Indigenous epistemologies. And the reason that I'm here is because in both my daughter's cases, they have endured, perhaps it's the wrong word, but they have gone through the lifelong challenges of being Indigenous children living in a white world. And I, as a white male, a white settler colonist, and my wife, white settler, we saw what challenges they faced and tried to give them all the opportunity to explore their indigeneity the best we could. But it's a road they go down alone, because we are white people living in a white world, watching our Indigenous children traverse their way through the white colonist world. And without reaching into hyperbole, it's been a significant challenge for both of them. Anyway, the opportunity to be part of the Unlearning Hour for as long as I have, which has just been a few months, just to listen to different ways of looking at the world beyond my own settler colonist perspective. Anyway, and I'm glad to be here. And I'll pass it on to Terry.
Okay, this is fascinating. I'm glad the students are here, because you're adding a lot. So I'm Terry Hermson Jubilado from Otterbein, English, Environmental Studies, Poetry, and but I'm here more as a climate activist. That's what I've been spending the last 5 years doing, trying to make something happen in Central Ohio around climate change action. And it's been frustrating, but sometimes successful and sometimes not. But what I experienced in Kadeen's show is another way of coming at connections to the planet. And I'm interested in, I've been helping to build audiences to come to the Frank and experience the show. And she said a minute ago, it's a space for some kind of shifting that is happening. And I believe that's close to, that's about as well said as we can say. Something happens in this space. And Michelle, you've experienced it. It happens differently practically every time, but I think it does have something to do with unlearning and multisensory knowing and listening in different ways. And so I believe Kadeen's here at great risk to herself and her own life in terms of her timing in the future to figure out what's going on there, theoretically, emotionally, historically, uh, climate-wise, Earth-wise. There's a lot we're trying to explore and unpack and name and research. So we're really welcoming any of the input that you all are bringing and that others have been bringing. I think it's about the most essential work one of the most essential things we could be doing. What is the sensory and that kind of knowing have to do with the changes that we know need to take place if we're going to have human civilization on the planet. So that's where I'm coming from. I hope to add something useful.
Richard, I think that leaves you.
Yeah, it's really, I always appreciate hearing where people are coming from, especially when this space is beyond the classroom and not, not a space that we're trying to create kind of between learning environments at OSU. And I think what's really important for me, so I'm an associate professor in the Department of Arts Administration, Education and Policy here at OSU, but I used to be in the classics department, and I moved to Ohio in 2006 from the UK, and then I moved from the classics department in 2018, and that story is one where, and I think we've all outlined, and it's been very interesting to hear a kind of a relation to Indigenous practices and ways of knowing and people. And I think for me, I was so trained and educated in a certain kind of curriculum and canon that came from the ancient Mediterranean cultures of Greece and Rome, that it was almost like I kind of couldn't see what was where I was, like underneath my own feet, like where I was. And what I bring to the Cachewalla Kuna group and to this gathering is an attention to a kind of global experience of Indigenous practices and arts as a mechanism to kind of unsettle kind of knowledge systems that have been so deeply entrenched in really a transplanted, and Peter talked about this, like the settler colonial context. And so I'm no expert in the Andean or Amazonian cultures in any sense. I'm part of this group to kind of think about the connections that we make in our group, not only to other Indigenous groups, and we've been lucky in this group and in other settings to collaborate with Indigenous artists from the Andean and Amazonian regions, but also from here in Turtle Island. So local Indigenous artists, Indigenous students like Anna, Peter's daughter. And there's this sense of understanding all those relations becomes really important. And, one of the big questions for me when Kadeen's work came into kind of our orbit as a way of thinking was this sense of how to balance this attention to land that was a relation that wasn't human to natural, but somehow being to being, in a sense that had kind of echoes and resonances with very broad conceptions of indigeneity, whereby, one reason why there is a kind of broad consensus among Indigenous peoples associates with the land and what is the land. So the land has to be kind of reconfigured, or we have to unlearn what we think the land is. And that's one of the most basic principles. And it's important not to conflate Indigenous cultures with each other and to be very specific to different nuances, nor is it's very important not to have a kind of what we would call a white move to innocence by engaging with Indigenous cultures as settlers. But it is also important to really listen to the warning signs that I think Terry articulated as an environmental activist, that one of the ways we can listen is to attempts by anyone, including artists and academics and students and parents, to want a different way. And it's, there's a lot of interesting kind of tensions within the space of unlearning and decolonization about Indigenous representation, and they're very important, like nothing about us without us, that kind of sentiment. That's very important. And it is important to acknowledge when we, especially in the academy, in the university, where Indigenous presence in space, especially here in Ohio, with the removed tribes and these kinds of issues, is less kind of present. At the same time, that shouldn't stop us doing this kind of work. Like, this work is really important to kind of prepare ourselves and those of us that, you know, haven't even thought about what Indigenous art making could be and do, and how it aligns with environmental justice. So there's lots bubbling away. And I just, you know, the best thing about this space has always been, it is comprised of the people that show up and are here. And so introducing each other, like making little connections between something that one person said with someone else said. There is no teacher here who controls everything. There's no lesson plan or curriculum. We just build on the threads that come from what we do. And I mean, again, just there is kind of a curriculum in what everyone has spoken a little bit about as well. And I'll pass it on to Alcira Dueñas, who is going to introduce herself as a key member of the Cachuela Cuna group, and who also brings really important historical perspectives to some of the questions that we ask as a group. So sorry for the long intro. It was just, I just get excited when everything starts to accumulate in our introductions, and it just shows the kind of range of thinking that we're doing in this space. Alcira? You're muted.
Always forget that little detail. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry that I joined late, but Fridays are meeting days, so everything's overlapping. But thank you for this space. Thank you, Michelle, Emily, Claire, Bayer, Peter, and thank you very much, Kadeen, for your work. I really had a sort of little epiphany when I went to the gallery, and it was all by myself. That was wonderful, really wonderful. And I had the chance to spend all the time that I wanted there with everything that is propitiated by this suggestion, big suggestion, right? I teach history at the Newark campus. I do mostly ethnohistory of the colonial indigenous communities of the Andes. And I've been trying to explore more about what they brought to society in terms of thoughts, ideas, writings, and the contributions to the ways of thinking colonial from a perspective that I want to construct as decolonizing perspective, right? So when I was at the gallery, I kept thinking about this issue that comes from so far back in time, and indigenous peoples, yes, but a lot of peoples in general who have been connected to the land, people who have been close to or closer than us to nature, and the sound of the vibration of the seeds at first really struck me as ancient sound, in the way that it's a sound that we have probably lost today. I couldn't quite associate that sound with anything that I was familiar with, but I really wanted to get closer to it. And I actually had to go and put my ear against the little speaker that was hidden behind the thing. And I had all these, images and feelings about, I don't know how to say in English, ebullición, right? This ebullición, this popping of life that was so silent. And for us, like it's there, but we don't hear it. Like our ear has become a little handicapped by noise and by the attention that we give to everything else but where we are standing, right? So I don't want to extend myself too much either, but it's just that I was just so taken by your by your suggestion there, that I just simply wanted to finish with a question that you probably want to address if you want to or not, or later, or whenever it's appropriate. But first, it's just a very technical curiosity that I have. Maybe you have gotten this question already many times before. And I have to say that the girl that was in the gallery, she was so good. The student, I think she's a student of art. I forgot her name. She was just so into, addressing all the questions and wanting to share what she learned from you. And she was great. She couldn't answer this question though, which I didn't expect anybody but you to know, which is, one is a technical one, which is, how did you get to capture the vibration and the sound of the vibration? It's a very technical question, but it's important, I think, for us to know. Maybe you already discussed this before. I couldn't come to the previous meeting or the previous before that one, but I'd like to know that. And second, I think it's more like a feeling or a rippling effect of your work, which is, from the pedagogical viewpoint, is how to teach, not by teaching. How to teach without teaching, and how to bring the students. And unfortunately, and I'm not teaching this semester, so I couldn't bring my students or invite my students to the gallery, but how to teach through feeling. It's something that I always had in my mind after I visited a museum somewhere in Berlin, where it was a museum for the blind, right? For the blind people. And then it was made by blind people. And then the public, as you go, the way that you experience the art is through touching. And it's dark, everything's dark. You don't know where you're putting your hand, but you're taken to these mysterious, risky spaces to feel, just to feel. You don't know what you're gonna find there. And then you have to put your hand in something and feel it, right? So in this space that you created with the love idea, brings me to the pedagogy of things that academia or science or our scholarship has not been able to really explain, which is, how would feeling come into the learning process, right? And how to teach by feeling, by propitiating feelings in the students and in the teachers too, right? What do we get from feeling? Because in your exhibit, I think there were many experiences. You can experience from the sound, from the space, those beautiful, what's the name of the mats? The Japanese mats.
Tatami.
Tatamis, what a wonderful experience to kneel down there and to be there. So all is, triggering your feeling, your sensations and things. And I think it's a very beautiful pedagogical tool as well, not only contemplation. That's great, that's all there. But I don't know, I don't want to talk more because I have this inability to stop. So I'm sorry. Thank you very much. That's all I wanted to say for now.
And maybe, so this is what happens in the Our Unlearning Hour, that anytime that we come to this with an agenda, as Richard was saying, basically we follow the threads. And Alcira, I'm so excited that you were able to visit the exhibit, the questions that you raised for Kadeen, but also as you were speaking, it really resonated with some of the reflections in class, that Emily and Claire have participated in. So I wanted to open it up, especially to to y'all, Kadeen, Emily, Claire, to sort of share some of those connections that go off as Alcida is speaking, as Richard is speaking, about what do we do in this space. Just before that, maybe just to say that our Unlearning Hour, and during the pandemic, our distance Unlearning Hour, was a really special space that I think sustained a lot of us. Like it created a community in a context of isolation. And it also invited like a markedly different type of conversation, that cut across like different people in academia, people outside of academia, that type of thing. And that different type of dialogue and engagement, again, I just felt like it was so contrasting to the world around us that was fraught with political and just different types of discourses that were out there. So one of the questions is, we would love to, we want to sustain that, what we learned. That was one of the lessons from the pandemic and even before during our Unlearning Hour, but how to sustain that. So in any case, that's kind of a little bit of what the space is, but I'll pass it back to Kadeen, Claire, Emily to jump in.
I'm just gonna jump in if I may. Sorry, Emily. I want to give you the the time right now, but I'm in a car and I've noticed that all my things are telling me warning low battery, and I need to kind of connect. Everything was delayed, so it's been an emergent schedule, and they're coming back into the car, 5 people, so I'm gonna lose access in a second. I just want to say, Alcira, thank you so much for those remarks. Really touching. I have goosebumps, and there's so much to say. I would love to hear also Emily, Claire, your voices, and everyone. I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to kind of talk about these ideas. And I also want to just say that learning by feeling and learning, teaching. I mean, I'm like interested in lifelong learning, right? And is where it's at. It's the future. It's like, how do we come back to the feeling is really something I'm really, the embodied learning is something I'm so interested in. If it's okay, I'm gonna have to somehow remove myself here and then follow up with the video.
Thank you,
I
Kadeen.
want to say that
Okay,
there's so
Kadeen.
much going on already that if we could continue the conversation that you
Yeah.
just started us on about feeling, through teaching through feeling, I'd love to see that continue maybe in future weeks. So let's not let it drop.
Yeah.
See you,
Sorry,
Kadeen.
this is a wonderful conversation, and I look forward to hearing where it goes. And okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kadeen.
Thank you, Kadeen.
I mean, it's very unusual for us to have the artist present, and so like that. I mean, I just want to kind of acknowledge that Kadeen is here to not just to make the work that was there, that is in the Otterbein, in the Frank, but also think about where it moves forward and how it is then communicated into the future. And so, Kadeen, we're always grateful for your presence, but we also understand that you are here for a short period of time, and we are kind of forming a relation around your work, inspired by your work. And some of us still haven't been yet to the exhibition. And Terry, and some of us, maybe Peter, will never get to go because of where you are. I mean, that's possible. So the ongoing resonances and of the work are important too. And this is all part of that. By documenting these conversations with you, Kadeen, and around your work is very important for that too.
I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Take care.
So Emily, I saw you had your mic open and eager to speak, so the floor is yours.
Well, Alcida, I don't think I got to introduce myself to you. I'm a
Hi,
fourth
Emily.
year, hi, in my undergrad at Ohio State, and I'm taking Professor Wilbesman's Latin Soundscapes class. And something you said that kind of stuck with me is you talked about how when you were experiencing Kadine's artwork that you felt a popping of life beneath you with the vibrations and something that had been lost over time, something that maybe we once heard but can't hear now. And that kind of brought up something we talked about in class yesterday about an elitism when it comes to sound. I took some notes, that's why I keep looking over here so I can remember what I'm going to say. But we talked about how there is a human versus non-human elitism in sound. And I feel like oftentimes it is so easy to have a muted ear when it comes to the sounds around us, with it, whether that's in nature, whether that's in other people groups that we are not accustomed to understanding or hearing. And it has become muted and something that we can't necessarily hear all the time unless we're putting ourselves in the position to truly listen. And that also kind of brought up the conversation of what is human, what does that mean? And I did a little research after class yesterday and kind of came to the conclusion that being human is being the knower, being a responsible agent and a person in relation to another person. So being human doesn't necessarily mean being an actual human. Human is in the eye of whatever is making the sound that we're hearing. So it was kind of interesting to think about how, things around us are communicating with each other in sound, and how nature is communicating through sound, and to nature, like they are the human. I don't know if that's making sense, but they are the knower and they are the beholder. And so sound to the earth and sound between the seeds that we're vibrating, it's something that we don't always hear. And we always take the sounds that we make for in a higher regard than the things around us. So this conversation has kind of led me to start thinking about, what are the sounds around me, and am I able to hear it? Is it just that I've become so kind of ignorant to the things around me, and not actually giving myself the ear to hear what nature is saying, what the earth is saying, what people groups around me are saying. So that really made me think about that, Alcieta, when you talked about the loss of that sound over time and how we were once able to hear it, but can't necessarily today unless you're really trying to. So that was a very interesting perspective you brought up.
I don't know. Yeah, I was going to invite you, Claire, to jump in, but this idea, Emily, that we talked about perspectivism, right? Like that the person, plant person, seed person making the sound conceives of themselves as human,
Right.
and that the sphere of humanity is the people who are engaging with that language or with that sound, right? So it right now, as you were speaking, it made me think about um, also the nature of knowing, the nature, like people as knowers, right? Humanity as knowers, but that is entirely relational, right?
Yeah.
It's not like that one knows by oneself, but only in reference to that sphere of communication,
Right.
right?
Yes, and that was one thing I found where it said it's human is a person in relation to another person, within your community of circles. So it's so easy to sort of not realize that there is so much more to the world than just your community and just the sounds you're hearing. It's so much bigger than that. So I think that is a really interesting conversation for sure.
Because these conversations are open and they always go such interesting places, I'm thinking of the other things we don't hear.
Yes.
I happen to have a couple naturalists, so you can walk across a city in Maryland and they're hearing a sound that's like 50 yards, 100 yards away, and they, oh, bald eagle or whatever. That means they're constantly aware of that entire universe of avian life. And it's the same thing with people who know plants well. If you walk around with Jenny Adkins, that Kadeen is with right now from Mad Scientist, she's pointing out plants on the ground that I think of as weeds. And yet she knows that that particular plant is native to Ohio, and it's very unusual to find it in that place. And it kind of I mean, I know it's sight versus sound, but it opens up this sense of being somewhere instead of just walking through, along a trail and there's a bunch of plants there. So I think that kind of deep knowledge of sound and awareness is what I'm hearing from you. I think it's just beautiful.
Yeah, it was a really great conversation to have with the class yesterday, and having Kadeen there to kind of explain the way that she created her artwork, and hearing what it means to her and why she created it. It really did bring up a conversation that I think many of my classmates had never thought about sound as being more than what we currently think. I also feel that sound is a sense that is sometimes lesser than the other senses we feel. It kind of gets muted by the other things that we're feeling. So it by examining, sound is more than what we think. It definitely opens up our eyes to a greater world.
Yeah, this idea of sort of a holistic engagement with art and the world around us, I think is something we've talked a lot in my class with Professor Wibblesman. So like I mentioned, we changed classrooms inspired by our meeting with Kadeen, and we went up to, what is the name of the room?
It's the Spanish and Portuguese conference room. It's room 255, but it happens to house our collection of Andean and Amazonian indigenous art. Yeah.
Yeah. But our first day there, we all came in and we took off our shoes, and Professor Wibblesman started unlocking all of the cases where the art was and just handing it to us. And I think everyone was like, no, we can't touch this. This is like beautiful, like precious art. Don't let us hold this. But obviously, like, as we're talking about, like, art is not just something to be sort of looked at, but to be like engaged with. And it's a really, like it should be sort of part of our lives, and seen and held and touched and listened to, and not just something in sort of glass cases to look at. So I think that was a very transformative moment for us to really be thinking like this is not just sort of a symbol to like look at and like contemplate, but something to really engage with holistically.
Yes, Claire, my class also did that. We also moved over to 255 for our Thursday session, and we had a very similar experience holding the artwork, feeling it. There are instruments that have etchings that are so deeply, I forget the name of it, Professor Wibblesman, the smaller one that has the stories all over it that's etched in, feeling it and feeling someone carved this to create a story to be felt. It kind of transcends the music that it makes to a higher power, because you're feeling that this was carved for a purpose and a reason. And it was so eye-opening to hold the artwork and know that it was, like Claire said, meant to be touched and held and experienced more than just looking at it. So that was also a transcending experience for my class too.
Yeah, no, I'm excited that you felt that. I think that when we do visit the Frank Museum, that engagement with the art, inspired by Kadeen, of like walking on it, touching it, listening to it, the broader sort of conversation that it opens goes back to something that Richard had said, which is about decentering, like certain types of ways of knowing and conceiving of learning and knowing the world in a much broader multisensory type of way, right? And also in attempting to create like informal spaces or create different spaces, even in the confines of our classrooms or universities. So I wonder, I mean, I'll just leave it with that statement. It's not exactly a question, but it really comes out of some of the things that you've been saying for sure, and connecting back to different ways of learning, knowing, feeling as pedagogy, that type of thing brought up by Richard and Alcida also.
I'm fascinated with this conversation because I think it allows us to step out of the usual, right? As usual, as it's becoming usual here. But I was also thinking, when you mentioned perspectivism earlier, that's something that we don't even put in the record, like it's totally out of the question. We don't do that. And when you approach nature, for example, even less, because the human is the knower, the one producing the knowledge. The other way around, there's no relationship. And I remember a movie, I think some of you may have seen it. It's called The Embrace of the Serpent. Did you see it? A Colombian film about this shaman who his major trauma was that he forgot, that he totally forgot what he knew as a shaman, right? And so he's growing up completely lost. And he used to call it that he was a chuyachaki, which meant an empty shell. He said, it's an empty shell. I'm going in the world without being anything. I'm a chuyachaki.
Yeah, so Alcira, chuda means like a pair of socks. The one when you lose the sock, it's chuda, right? Like it's supposed to have a pair, but doesn't it? And then chaki is path, right? So it's like the lonely path is what that translates into. Yeah, that's
right.
amazing.
And then, yes, that's great. That's a great explanation because it makes total sense. And then when he meets the white foreigner, I think he was an ethnobotanist, right? That goes to get knowledge from him, right? He first refused to give it because he sees in the foreigner the symbol of, the rubber boom and the Indian slavery and all that happened to the community. But the foreigner is going for healing because the foreigner is sick. So he thinks that the shaman can help him, and the shaman doesn't want to because he is the cause of his trauma, right? So it's a beautiful film that puts upside down all these ideas about, this romantic relationship between, the good Westerner and the indigenous people. But that's another story. It's a great movie in itself. But the perspectivism that I wanted to mention in that film is this scene where he, as a young shaman, forgot his name, but he's looking at this tapir. How do you say in English that animal?
It's the
Tapir.
same as tapir.
Is it the same?
Mm-hmm.
There's a tapir standing by the river, and he just discovered the tapir right there, and then he goes and look, and then he's mesmerized with the tapir because it's the first time he's seen a tapir, and the tapir turns to look at him, right? And then the camera stays for minutes showing the tapir looking back at him, right? So it made me think about this perspectivism thing that is like, no, it's not just you looking at things, it's that things looking back at you too. It's that you don't have the eyes to see that. And in the conversation we're having here, we don't have the ears to hear, how everything is, moving in multiple directions, right? And when it comes to learning, then it's a whole challenge of unblocking your ears and unveiling your eyes and begin to regain power through those feelings that you practically lost because we grew up in a society that is all here, right? It's all here. And we learn through here. And we're missing a whole universe.
So Alcira, one of the things this makes me think about is that that ability to sort of have a broader perspective from the indigenous sound world, right? It comes from sound, right? So
from where?
From sound. So with our class that Emily is in yesterday and in our conversation with Kadeen, we talked about how, from Amazonian perspectives, the ability to imitate sound of the non-human, whether it's plants or seeds or animals, not only allows you to potentially conceive of the perspective from that plant or that seed or that animal, but actually transform into one, right? So, but it all derives from a very deep ability to listen. And maybe Claire, connecting back to our class, you know, this idea of
Yeah.
conversation with nature as compadres, not as a resource, right, but as a being, as another human, you know, that we sort of interact with and converse
And,
with, right?
yeah. And I think that was also the beginning of language, right? I am surprised, especially in English. I don't see that much in Spanish, but in English, there's so many words that they are like a replication or a reproduction of sound, like crack, 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 something, you know, like the word is not, it's just like a representation of the sound, right? So I always think that in English there are many words like that. And it's just speaking to what you just said, right? When a baby says, when mama is the first word, it's not by chance, because it's almost like the first utterance of a human being. Ma, right? Like it's like the first thing that a baby utters without any culture here yet, right? But then culture incorporated that sound into a word, mama, right? That's when it became the mama or the mother. I don't know if I'm speculating too much, but
No,
I
I mean,
think,
I'm going to toss in that something that Kadeen might have said if she was here, because growing up in Japan, she has told us several times that the onomatopoeia, which is you know what you're talking about, is in practically every sentence. Practically every sentence is popping up with words that are imitating what the thing is, and I think it's a real good connection. I don't know, Michelle, where you're going with today, but I think this is a great re-entry point. And
Yeah.
and Kadeen and I and Janice have been talking about, well, what's the point of her being here? And I think to some degree what we've come down to is to explore together with people like who are here today, the students and faculty and everyone, what does this show do?
Mhm.
And I think we don't even quite know yet. I mean, everything we're going to try to do a larger film. We're getting a smaller film done, but we want to get money for a larger, somewhat more documentary film where people talk about their experiences and what you've said about being in that space alone and hearing the sounds. And I mean, that could be on the film. And because I think that's what our goal is. And I don't know if I'm just going to make the suggestion that as I think you're thinking about what do we do with this Unlearning Hour, you know, Richard and Michelle, maybe we could focus it a little bit more on that, the implications of what this show is teaching all of us in all the different ways. I don't
Yeah,
know. That's just an
I
idea.
think that this is a great. I think that was sort of the original, you know, thought was to center it on reflections. There are so many things, and I never even got to the overview update on all the Cachoeira Cuna projects, but we have at least a dozen of them ongoing with other artists. And this space is a space for digesting all of these amazing experiences that we have with our community partners in our collaborations and that type of thing. The other thing is this idea of radical something, right? Radical listening or radical deconstructing or decolonizing, that type of thing. So maybe coming to Alcira's conversation and Terry's about onomatopoeia, but we also know about the ideophones, right? That are very present in indigenous languages where they're not exactly words, but they're expressions that conjure sound, right? And thinking about extra symbolic type of conversations, like supralinguistic, right? So things that happen not necessarily through language that we can translate, but in other senses as well, that also function in terms of this amazing communication, and how all of that once again relates back to the ways in which we learn, unlearn, how we consider knowledge, and who produces that knowledge in the first place, you know. So Richard has the floor. I see your mic open.
It's not really. I'm always the person that has to do the job of closing these things off, because we can go on, and I always love the kind of momentum that comes with this space. And I think I mean, I don't think I've ever really talked about why the hour is so significant. There is an art experience I had where this artist put on this kind of performance for every hour, that 1 hour a day for this exhibition that lasted many months. And the idea was that in that hour, our individual kind of interests and focus will kind of dissipate as we start to generate a kind of collective subject that would kind of emerge from it. And, you know, and it always fails. Like, we're not somehow now joined together in this way. At the same time, I do think something does happen throughout the hour, in listening to each other, in connecting. You know, I think it's so beautiful that both Claire and Emily, coming from different classes that Michelle is in, are meeting in this space. It's just a very beautiful thing. And we're always looking for the methods that we can use to get those connections. And so, yeah, so we'll be here next week, and we will go through the updates that Michelle talked about. Something else will come up, lots of things. There's lots of an openness for this space, but thanks for your presence, because, you know, if you're not here, this doesn't happen. It would just be me or
and
Michelle.
thank you too for organizing it. So I didn't miss the updates, Michelle?
No, we never got to the update.
We'll
so
do them
maybe
next.
We'll do them next time.
Next
good to be
time, and
late
then the time
like
after that. The
Right.
time after that.
We'll attempt it at least. But I just wanted to thank you, Richard, for framing, you know, the experience, for spearheading the Our Unlearning Hour in the first place, and framing what this experience is for all of us. And also invite thank Emily and Claire for coming, you know, to invite you back into this space, and invite you back into this kind of very special community. Bring your friends and classmates as we continue to reflect. Terry, thank you for the collaboration with Otterbein University that has really been so inspiring, you know, the work with Kadeen. And yes, to keep it centered on those types of discussions of the experiences and the reflections vis-a-vis her work. Alcira, we will talk again, both from your perspective as an academic, and then this amazing perspective and the experience of the space. And Peter, this is what we're talking about, you know, like as we think about how some of the methodologies that are emergent, because it is totally emergent, are drawing on trying to listen and learn from indigenous epistemologies that are much more aware, you know, of the broader world around us, I think, you know, in some contexts, than our society seems to be.
On that note, take care, everyone. Happy Friday.
Thank you so much.
Have a great weekend.
Have a
Thank
great
you,
weekend,
everyone.
everybody. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Let me stop the recording.